All right, we are doing a palette knife demo. This is your practice palette knife. And what I want you to do is to cover a piece of mat board with a thin layer of white acrylic paint. You can let some of the black show through. And then, if you need to, you can use the hair dryer to dry it out a little bit. Then do a quick little sketch of what it is you want to use. You can copy my apple drawing if you want. You could find a picture of fruit. Just like you to use some kind of shadow, do something somewhat simple so that you can get a good feeling for how to use the paints in this palette knife painting. A lot of times palette knives paintings are done with oils. But we're using acrylics this time because it's a little less expensive. But to use acrylics, we need to use modeling paste, which is kind of like plaster, wet plaster, that will give you some body to the acrylic paint, make it a little thicker. And you'll notice that is the modeling paste, that it has two pieces of plastic on it to keep it from drying out. So make sure when you get some out, you'll need about 3 tablespoons. Get about 3 tablespoons out, and then when you're done getting it out, please make sure that you seal the paint back up. Add a little bit of water to the modeling paste to keep it from drying out. Cover it back up, seal it with that first piece of plastic, and then even grab a little bit of water and give it a squirt right inside there to keep a little moisture. Put that other piece of plastic on, put the other lid on, seal it up really well, and then you can get out the other bit of medium. This is gel medium, and that one is a glossy one. You can get ones that aren't glossy, but what this will do is make our modeling paste a little more soft, a little more fluid, and will keep it from drying out too fast. The ratio you want is about 1/3 gel medium, that's that runnier stuff, and then 2/3 of the modeling paste. So 1/3 gel medium, 2/3 modeling paste, and then give it a good stir. Stir it up really well. And we'll be using that in all the paint that we use. Now for this particular painting, we are going to use just a monochromatic palette just to practice. So I'm using black, white, and gray. And I'll mix a little bit of that gel medium and that modeling paste in with it so that, again, it'll be nice and thick and I can get some really great textures. Make sure to always clean off your palette knife. Here I'm going to put a little bit of white on the palette and then mix a little bit of the gel medium and modeling paste right into that white paint. So I'll be ready to paint with it. And I'm using black too. Just make sure I have some different values all ready to go and continue to squirt them so I can work quickly with this palette knife painting. Stirring it up, and then I can start to put the paint right on. Keep your palette knives clean. Feel free to use that board that we had so that we can create some cool work with it. Protect the table, you don't have to clean it up as much. And when you start, I would recommend that you watch the videos that I have in the step for palette knife painting on Schoology. There is a great video of an artist doing a palette knife painting, and you can see the way he or she uses some long flat strokes and some tiny little strokes at like the end of his palette knife, which is what I tend to do. I'm trying to get better at using a big, broader, flat bit so I can get some better texture. And if you look in this piece that I already did, it's dry, but for example, I don't like I had to wait a little bit and put some straight black on there because when I mix the modeling paste and the gel medium with a tube of paint, it actually lightens it. It like adds a little white to it, obviously, because the modeling paste is white. So when I want the pure pigment, I'm going to go back after my painting's dry and have a lot of texture and put the pure pigment on there. So for example, here I want black, black. So I'm putting straight up paint on there. I'm putting a stem in. I'm kind of making it a little fat. I'll show you how I fix that later. But anytime you want pure pigment, put it back on. That acrylic paint with the modeling paste and gel medium, though, makes a nice thick texture that I can then add other paint to. So now watch while I start painting this apple, and I'll speed it up a little bit here, but you can see how I'm going to add some different textures. Still finishing up that other one here for a little bit. Here I also let the paint blend together while I'm putting it on, and that's part of the charm of a palette knife. You're kind of mixing colors as you go, mixing the values as you go, and making a nice texture and a nice transition. Here I'm sort of doing the same stroke over and over, and I want to use a bigger part of my knife. You'll see how I do that on some of the other pieces in just a second. Kind of grabbing it and making a broader sweep while it's still wet. Of course, the acrylic paints dry faster than oil paints. So when you're doing a palette knife with an oil paint, the advantage is you can keep moving around. However, then you are also more likely to make a muddy piece. So the acrylics are advantage that it can dry very quickly. We can add some more in there, but our texture is pretty much dried up. If you look at this other piece, I am going to show you in just a minute. Oh, here, I'm showing you some bigger, broader strokes with the palette knife. And what's fun sometimes is to have a different texture for the object you're doing and for the background to make the object pop out a little bit more. Also think about making your background change values according to what your object is. Let's say if the object is lighter, like on the right side here, I put a darker background. On the left, I may make the object pop out by making the background a little lighter. When I go to put a shadow in, do remember to have a reflected light in your shadow. How there's always an area inside the shadow that's a little bit lighter. And remember that if you need to make that really dark line underneath, you're going to use some straight pigment. You can try that. If you look at this one that I was working on before, I tried some. Here I want to fix the stem. I put this big blob of black in there, so I'm dabbing a little bit of white with the paintbrush and then adding a little black around the edge with the palette knife just to make it look a little bit better. And then the next step is I wanted to show you some ways I can add some color. So one is to just take a little bit of red and kind of scumble it on top and let the red just barely hit the texture or whatever color you want to do. And another way is to actually make a glaze. So I'm using the gel medium and I'm thinning the red and putting it on very thinly to let it sit right on top of the texture. And I can use different colors, just like we did with the oil paints when we did that earlier in the year. And it'll just give it a hint of color. Therefore, I could have had an underpainting of a whole different color, like the burnt sienna, just like we did with the oil paint, and did a glazing technique that way as well. And now here are some shots of some finished examples. This one is a little bit of the glazing up close, and you can see where I put some of the blobs too. And then I put some more color glazing on just so you could see. And here is a close-up of the glazing with different colors. Hope you enjoyed the video and get to work. Bye.